Welcome everybody to our SMA conference. We had the French session a little earlier today, and now is the English session. So thank you for the people who are here in person, and everyone who is watching online. Just a little reminder, the presentation is being recorded, so it will be available after the fact through the Muscular Dystrophy Canada website. So without further ado, the agenda for the day. So we have Kira Sma giving a presentation on SMA in the community, myself giving a clinical trials 101, essentially how do clinical trials work, and then lastly Dr. Genge will be discussing what happens after drug approval, how quickly can you get the medication once it's been accepted by Health Canada, and also new therapeutics. So without further ado, I'll ask Amy to come up.
I'm Amy Loignon. I'm co-president of Cure SMA Quebec, which are provincial chapter of Cure SMA Canada. What is Cure SMA Canada? How did it begin? Well, it was founded, the first version was actually Families of SMA. It was in the United States and it started about 30 years ago. By families who decided that they had a child with SMA and didn't have any hope of getting medication. It was a rare disease. There wasn't anything going on, and who would invest into rare diseases? So they decided to get together and founded Families of SMA to fund research for disease and find a cure for SMA. In 2000, Families of SMA Canada was founded here in BC by 3 families, and it was restructured in 2011 to add directly family support as well as Canadian research projects. During this time, Families of SMA in the States changed name and became Cure SMA in order to really move on to that research aspect. So in 2017, Cure SMA Canada followed the way. And so since its beginning in Canada, there has been over $3 million awarded in Canadian SMA research and more than $500,000 in family support. The mission of SMA Canada, of Cure SMA Canada, is to support families and individuals affected, to fund research into medications. Now we are getting close. We have some things that are coming along, some things that are now approved but not quite available. But there's more. We need more research. We need more medications. We need to have something for all these types. And the other mission is to educate, whether it be first-line family physicians or pediatricians into what is SMA, and so they can diagnose it as quickly as possible and provide the best care. Some family support examples here is what Cure SMA has bought is these car beds for type 1s, which we can see on the left. So if you have a type 1, they can't sit up. So how do you get them around in a car? How do you get to your medical appointments? How do you go do groceries? You're going to need to bring them safely in something, and that is a car bed, which are quite expensive actually. So Cure SMA bought 4 or 5 of these and are lending them out to families. So this is just one example of different equipment that can be bought and utilized by families. And when a child is diagnosed, they get a family a really big box, like we can see in the middle, with all these toys in it. There's also stuff for parents. There's educational booklets, information, but essentially it's toys, and it's to remind parents that kids are kids, whether they have a disease or whether they have SMA. They need to play. They need to be loved. That's the essential of it. And some family support examples also is when a child is hospitalized, they can, Cure SMA Canada can help to defray the costs of parking, which is very expensive, and food at the hospital, because meanwhile the parents aren't working. There's no income coming in, but it's costing a lot to be in the hospital. There have been some very individualized examples of stories that, for instance, one family in BC, their child was very sick, was in northern BC, was airmedic to southern BC for treatment, and that child was not going to survive. Now, whoever's been in this situation will know that parents aren't allowed in the airmedic flight. So parents were in northern BC while the child was in southern BC. about an hour's drive, and was dying. So Cure SMA organized a flight, paid for it, so that the parents could be with their child in their dying hours. And these are just some of the examples of family support that Cure SMA will provide. And what's we all want to be there right now. It's Camp Out West. Look how beautiful that is. And you've got a Western camp that has been going on for over a dozen years, organized by families, for families. They do adapted hiking, as we can see in the left photo. It's kind of like a hammock with metal bars, and you can go actually mountain hiking with that. And where everything is adapted, you can do adapted biking, you get together, adapted kayaking. It's really a great moment for families to connect, for kids to find friends and to be just one of the gang. And since a few years ago, there has been an Eastern camp. This is the Ontario version. We moved from Ontario to Quebec in alternating years. This is Ontario camp. So there's drama class, there's games, there's costume night, dance night, karaoke. And this is the Quebec camp that was held for the first time this year in French to provide some services in French for our families here. And, we had Cheeto toss where you have to try to stick it to the head. And we had even a little farm on the campgrounds where all the kids could go into the llama pen and play with them. And even where we see this middle picture, this was just before 3 heads fell. And where we're going, okay, this is like the only place in the world where 3 heads are on their side, and it's completely normal. We need a pause. Some events that we've held is our annual SMA picnic, and there was also an event in a hotel in Quebec City where we paid for 10 families a weekend away with their child. With the whole family. So 10 families in a hotel with a pool and activities and animals and whatnot. And it was all paid for them. And with Christmas parties going on also. And the support lasts a lifetime. So it's really all these kids will have friends, will have people they know, will be able to, have parties together. Like we can see they meet up for lunch or supper. And for parents also, it's nice to have people who have been through it, who have tricks, who know this is what I did for my adaptation for my house. This is, what I'm doing now for school, and have that support. In terms of what is educational support, we've got the Family Guide to Research SMA. We've got Nutrition Basics. These are all booklets. There's Orthopedics, that's not mentioned here, but Breathing Basics, Genetics, all booklets that are sent to families when first diagnosed or whenever you need some information. Cure SMA can send this to you. And it's really a booklet, in-depth information. You can even give it to your family physicians so they can know more about being able to treat you and your condition. Every year, there's a Cure SMA annual conference, so people from around the world get together in the States. It changes places every year. They're up to their 30th year. This is organized by Cure SMA in the States, but it really is international. This was this past June in Walt Disney World in Florida. There were 2,000 people with family, either themselves affected by SMA or with family members affected by SMA, and there were 500 researchers present. So at this conference, you have full of different topics. You can go for orthopedics, for yoga, for pool therapy, for orthopedics and nutrition. You really pick and choose which conferences you want, and this is really the only place in the world where if you're walking, you're in the minority. It's all about the chairs. So this was this year's conference. The next one, if ever you're interested, is the 30th edition. It's in Dallas, Texas, and it usually runs in June, end of June. As for research, where we're at right now, there's 18 molecules in development. So this is really an exciting time for SMA. If we think back to maybe 30 years ago, the gene was just being discovered, and now we're fixing it. It's incredibly amazing. For those newly diagnosed, it's an incredibly great time for them. So you've got these 18 coming up, you've got 6 in clinical trials, and there's 1 approved medication, which is Spinraza right now, which Dr. Genge will talk more about later. This is the SMA drug pipeline currently. So in blue is the Spinraza. That's the one that is approved. It was approved on the 26th of December in the States and was approved this year on July 1st for Canada. Now it is approved by Health Canada, but it is not quite available. Provinces are still negotiating on the price. We're waiting for Ines to give their recommendations. So there are some other stats we're expecting maybe in summer 2018. So some are coming up, some more that it should be available at that point. The other ones that are coming up will be discussed later on, but you can see there are 6 in clinical development. Those are the clinical trials, and there are more coming up, and there's more. I mean, this is just these 18, but there's more coming up, and this is very important because we're looking for different strategies for different types, for different, if you're younger or older, and we don't know if all of these will work either, so it's important to have lots in development and to keep on researching and funding these so that we can have a cure, because right now they're all only treatments we really want to cure. And so these are the investigational strategies that are being investigated for the drug therapies. You've got the neuroprotectors, which will protect the neurons, the SMN2 activator, which will just boost them. If we're already having it, can we make more? The splicing modulation, so it's like a phrase. If we're missing a piece, our body can't read it, so it's trying to give that piece back. Gene therapy, which is inserting the actual missing part of the gene into the gene. And muscle enhancements we've got the neurons, but we need to help the muscles also, and which most likely will lead to the most impressive combination therapies are going to pave the way. It's going to probably be a combination of all of these that are going to be the best for individuals affected. In terms of demographics, right now there's about 50% that are type 1s, 30% that are type 2s, 15% type 3s, and the other 5% are either type 4s or unknown, or other than 5q SMA. And we have a delay in diagnosis sometimes, or not sometimes, just always, because you've got the onset of symptoms. So if you're type 1 and you start seeing symptoms at 2 months, the delay before you actually get a diagnosis will be 2.3 months more than that. So we're talking about, in this example, 4.3 months. If you're type 2, it's even longer, and type 3, even longer. Why this delay in diagnosis is really important is that 90% of denervation occurs in the first 6 months. So if you're only diagnosed, these are for type 1s, so if you're only diagnosed at 4 months, by the time you actually get Spinraza or another medication or are entered into a clinical trial, most of the denervation has occurred. So it's really important, and that's what Cure SMA and other organizations are working on, is to bring newborn screening to Canada and Quebec, where this will be tested at birth. So we can know right away before symptoms appear and get them into clinical trials or into therapies before symptoms start appearing. And we're also working on increasing the clinical trial sites and the variety to be able to get all these kids and adults into it, and educating primary care physicians about SMA so they can spot it earlier and get these kids into the trials. In terms of Cure SMA Canada, 75% of our income is through fundraisers, and 25% is through membership and support, such as inscriptions to camp. These 5 fundraisers make up approximately 70% of our income. So it's really these 5 families, because it is families having these. It's not just Joe Blow somewhere saying, well, I'm going to have a fundraiser for SMA. These are people that have been affected or have lost their child through SMA. So we've got on top here on the left the SO Rebecca Run, and on the bottom right Sammy's Valentine's Gala. Now this family is in the room right now, and they have through their gala, given over $1 million to Cure SMA. They have raised through research. This is why we are where we are now with research. It's because of families like these that have provided money so research can continue and more research can be done. So we need more of these fundraisers. We need more of this help to help other families. This is the Camisos in Ontario and their son Callan, who has unfortunately passed away. It's also about family support, and the Camisos decided to give back and fund boxes for newly diagnosed children. So it's also about all this family support. And why do we still fundraise? Why do we still need this? Because if we have an approved medication like Spinraza, because we're not there yet, we don't have a cure. We're still in treatment. Not all types, not all types maybe will respond to Spinraza. We don't know. We need to keep on going. We need to find a cure. And because families still need support now. People are still in hospitals. People still need, to adapt their houses and get equipment, and they need information. So we still need to fundraise, and we're asking for help in this also. And how can you help? Well, participate. Participate in the activities that exist. Participate to make friends, to, if you're an individual affected by SMA, to have more knowledge, to know when things are coming up, when clinical trials are active, and to help fundraise also. So research can continue and can help support other families. And if you can't do this, offer also your support and advice. Maybe you have tricks to offer or things you have gone through that will help another family avoid some problems. I want to thank you. And if you want to contact us, Cure SMA Quebec is our Facebook page. That's where we'll post most of our information. You have the Cure SMA Canada website and Facebook page equally. If you have any questions, I'll be taking them at the end after our two other presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So with that, I'd like to note that please hold all your questions to the end. We're going to be doing a Q&A with all of our speakers. So those of you online, you can submit your questions and we'll get to them after Dr. Genge's presentation. So, and I did this for the front presentation. I realized I didn't introduce myself, but here I am. My name is Victoria Eon. I am a clinical research coordinator here in Montreal as part of our clinical research unit. And today I want to explain what clinical trials are, how they work, who can participate. So what is clinical research? It's medical research that involves people that are affected by disease. So it involves human participants, and it takes basic science research, so stuff done in laboratories with animals or in petri dishes, and it turns it into new therapies and therapeutics. This also allows us to gain insight on how the disease progresses and how does this compare to normal health. So all clinical trials are done through volunteer participation. And this helps us discover new ways to treat, diagnose, and understand these diseases. Clinical trials are sponsored, so our unit doesn't necessarily funding the trials, but they're sponsored by various organizations, including independent physicians who submit protocols to companies, foundations, medical institutions, and pharmaceutical companies. That being said, even though there's different sources of funding, all of these organizations have to follow the same regulations and rules on how to conduct trials. That's outlined by the FDA and Santé Canada, Health Canada. So they're all held to the same standard. So you've probably heard of the multiple phases. So what is that about? So phase 1 is the first time we see the drug in people. It's after the animal studies. And here we want to see, is it safe? So at this stage, it's very controlled. There's only a limited number of people who can get access to the drug at this time. It's also the first time that we start seeing side effects. Side effects in a mouse are very different than side effects in a person, and there's a lot of unknown factors here. So this typically involves less than 100 people. Then we move on to phase 2. Phase 2, we're looking to see, does it do what it's supposed to do? And this is where we start testing doses as well. So we'll try a couple different doses to see which one is the most effective but has the least amount of side effects. And again, we're collecting more data on side effect profile and to see if it does have a beneficial effect, especially compared to things that are medications that are already out there. And this typically uses a few more people, larger group, and more sites. Phase 3, which is the next along, this is where we really see, does it do what it's supposed to do? Does it work? And so we continue to monitor side effects, of course, because all of this is about security and safety. And this involves a lot more people and a lot more sites. This phase is right before the company will submit to get drug approval so that it's available for people everywhere. So this is really important to see that there is a positive effect and it doesn't cause many side effects. Phase 4 occurs after the drug's been approved. So we want to know what happens long term. Are there long-term side effects? Does the drug lose its effect over time? These are all things that the company wants to know moving forward. So this involves thousands of people potentially. And with all of these, I've put an asterisk because with rare diseases, because it involves a smaller group of the smaller piece of the population, you usually need less people in each phase to be able to get to drug approval. And because of the Orphan Drug Act in the US, there is a system that allows us to move through these phases quicker, and it allows for some acceptances in terms of regulation when it's in rare disease compared to diseases that are widespread. So how do trials work? You've probably heard of something called randomization. Unfortunately, it is necessary to avoid bias. So this basically means that when you enter a trial, you'd be assigned by chance, usually by a computer program, and this allows us to see if there's a true effect of the drug or if it's just our expectations that are causing the effects. So they're in the condition of double blind. The research team doesn't know what the assignment is, so that includes myself, the physician, and the rest of the team, and the patient doesn't know. That way, there's no room for us to treat your side effects differently if you have side effects. Clinical trials compare new therapy to an existing therapy, oftentimes in phase 3, to determine if this new therapy is just as good as or better than the existing treatment. And this is really important, especially when introducing therapeutics that have a similar mechanism to something that's already out there. Other types of trials involve a placebo, so there's a chance of being assigned to a placebo versus active drug. And the placebo is, in other words, a sugar pill. It's an inactive product that looks like the actual medication, but it doesn't have treatment value. And that, again, allows us to see if there's a real effect with this medication or if it's expectation playing on our results. So who can participate? With every clinical trial, there are eligibility criteria that help us identify patients that are appropriate to enter the trial and keep them safe. So this really allows us to factor out people with conditions that might, if you have a condition that would be affected negatively by taking an experimental medication, it might not be safe for you to enter a trial. It's for these reasons. So there's different criteria called inclusion criteria and exclusion. Inclusion are factors that allow you to participate. Exclusion criteria are factors that don't allow you to participate. And these are based on different things, such as age, gender, stage of disease, current medications, so medications you're taking, previous treatment history, or other medical conditions. Again, this is all for safety and also to see if in the population that's treated, there is a real effect. If there's too many factors and causation is not clear, there's not much, we can't really move forward with another phase of another trial because we don't know there's benefit. So I wanted to give you guys some examples of inclusion-exclusion criteria from a few of the Nusinersen trials that have happened and been resulted. So this is for Nurture, this is the phase 2. So in this trial, kids less than age 6 weeks, so type 1 were included. You had to be pre-symptomatic. You had to have genetic documentation of the homozygous gene deletion for exon 7. Other unknown mutations were not accepted, basically because of the way the drug worked. You had to have 2 to 3 copies of the SMN2 gene, and there were a number of other inclusion criteria, but these are the key ones. So exclusion, any abnormalities in the blood tests, any other significant conditions, medical conditions, any treatment with another experimental medication, or medication that works by a similar mechanism. So to compare, the phase 3 ENDEAR trial was slightly different. Here we have the same criteria for type and genetic confirmation, but only children with 2 copies of SMN2 were accepted. And with this trial, Biogen wanted all of the kids to reside within 9 hours, ground travel distance, so not flying, to the study center so that they could better monitor side effects. Exclusion criteria, much of the same. Lastly, to compare again, Cherish, which uses the same medication, but this time includes, or is just for type 2 SMAs, included kids from age 2 to 12, again with genetic confirmation, but this time there's some physical requirements. So the takeaway here, and with the exclusion criteria that are very similar, but more lengthy, they include any respiratory insufficiency that needs non-invasive or invasive ventilation. So it gets more complicated, and every trial is slightly different. So just because someone doesn't meet criteria for one trial doesn't mean they won't be eligible for other trials. Why participate? So with all clinical trials, the potential benefits are you could get access to a medication that is not widely available. You would receive regular and careful attention from the medical staff, so the coordinator, the doctors, and the rest of the healthcare team that you might not otherwise get. You would also help others by contributing to medical research. So behind every medication, there are hundreds and thousands of people who decided to try a medication so that everybody else could have access. And by this, you're also playing an active role in your own healthcare. Unfortunately, with benefits, we also have risks. So there may be unpleasant, serious, or even life-threatening side effects. Again, because it's an experimental medication, we don't know what could happen. And this is something you have to take into consideration when contemplating joining a trial. The study may also require more time out of your schedule. So the visits might be more frequent, maybe more blood tests, hospital stays, depending on the protocol. And there might be limitations on some of the medications you can take. So there is a balance between risk and benefit. which should be forefront when deciding to participate. So questions that we've brainstormed among our team to ask when thinking about a clinical trial. So really important things to bring to your study team is what is the purpose of the study? Why do researchers somewhere in the world think this could actually work? Who will fund the study? How long will the study last? So this really varies from study to study. It could be a few days, a few weeks, to a few months, to years. So all of these things are really important to take into consideration. Also, what are my responsibilities if I participate? So what will be expected of me if I join a clinical trial? Very importantly, can I stop or can I change my mind? So because it is volunteer participation, you can stop the study. We really encourage people who are considering a study to participate only if they really want to see the entire process through. That being said, we know that life happens, and if there's perhaps a side effect that is too bothersome or affecting your life, we understand, and there is the possibility to stop. However, we really encourage people who join trials to see it through. Also, when it comes to participation in care, knowing what kind of procedures are going to be done during this trial, what am I going to have to physically do? Also, what medications can I take? Can I continue taking everything I'm taking, or will I have to hold off starting a new medication? And I think most importantly, who will be in charge of my medical care? So at the beginning of each trial, we encourage everybody to come prepared with questions. And no questions are bad questions. So what to expect? Before starting a trial, you'd meet with the doctor, the clinical care team, and they would answer any questions you'd have about the drug, about the trial. You'd be provided an informed consent form, which explains key facts about the trial, what does the drug do, what is involved with all the visits. And this would need to be read, understood, and we'd sign off on it together because it's sort of like a contract. Afterwards, you need to complete a screening visit. So this allows us to see if you're eligible to start the trial. Depending on the protocol, there could be a physical exam, blood test, some scans, that type of thing. Only after the results of the screening visit can we confirm that you can enter the trial. And at that point, those visits would include further examination, testing, that sort of thing. At the end of the trial, when everything is completed, we ask you to come in for follow-up visits. And again, this is all for your security and your safety. We want to see, coming off of the drug or placebo or whichever you were assigned to, that your condition is stable and we have not caused harm, that we've perhaps caused benefit. So this is the typical organization of our CRU, or Clinical Research Unit. So the study coordinator you'd be interacting with the study coordinator, as well as the neurologist for physical exams. There might be raters, depending on the protocol, who would do questionnaires and other exams. Nurses, blood draws vitals. With our SMA programs, there's a lot of exercises with the physiotherapist. There might be imaging done, so MRIs. So this is your typical organization format. With that, who is the primary point of contact when you're in a trial? And that person is the study coordinator. They're the ones who communicate with all the members of the team to make sure that you are safe, you understand everything that's going on, and they're the ones who organize the visits and so on and so forth. How can you get involved in a trial? So step one, you can contact your physician and ask about current or upcoming trials. A really good place, or a really good place to start for us is to visit our website or the website of a unit nearest you and speak with a coordinator, because the coordinator will know what trials are coming, what is available, and will be able to connect you right away. You can also log on to www.clinicaltrials.gov, and that gives all the information, or all of the basic information for clinical trials going on throughout North America. So that'll tell you what the drug is, what the goal is, what phase, what are the inclusion-exclusion criteria, as well as what sites are participating, so you can find a place to join a study. So with that, thank you. And next, we will have Dr. Genge speaking on what happens after the approval process and also new things in the pipeline. Quick reminder, we'll answer all the questions at the end, so keep your questions handy. Thank you.
Well, for those of you who didn't hear the last session, I'm Angela Genge. I run our clinical research unit here at the Montreal Neurological Institute in Montreal. I also run our ALS clinic and clinical research program, and have been, through that angle, involved in adult SMA for a long time. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a couple of things. We'll use Spinraza or Nusinersen as a good example, and obviously the most interesting and important example for people with SMA, to educate you on the drug approval process so that you understand why things have to be done the way they have to be done, and also to understand why, once the drug was approved in the US in May, I've got the date wrong. When was it approved in May? December for the US. Why the whole world didn't have it the next day. Because why shouldn't they? Apple launches a cell phone and the whole world can have it, unless it's on back order, of course. So Spinraza or Nusinersen had a very specific and extremely well done development program that culminated in an early termination of a phase 3 clinical trial program. And it led to the approval of this drug in the US in December and in Canada on June 29th of this year. You'll hear both names being used, Spinraza and Nusinersen. The generic name would be Nusinersen, and the company name is Spinraza. What's really important to understand is that although it was approved by Health Canada on June 29th, that does not mean that on June 29th it was available to everybody. And so that's really the process I'm going to walk you through. So the drug was approved on June 29th. That means that Health Canada has said it's safe and able to be used by Canadian patients. However, in Canada, and it is the same forces exist in the US in a slightly different way, and I'll mention those as well. In Canada, once it's approved by Health Canada, the drug then needs to be reviewed by the provinces to determine whether the provinces are going to have the drug on what we call formulary, which is available through the provincial health system, and under what conditions, and how much it costs, and who pays for what percentage of the drug. And in the case of Spinraza, we also have to work out how we're going to give the drug. So step one has happened. Step one is June 29th in Canada. In the US, when it happened in December of 2016, their system allows for it to be prescribed. In fact, even our system allows for the drug to be prescribed immediately. As soon as approved, you can prescribe it. However, once you prescribe it, the system that has to be instituted is how you actually get the drug. How, whether it's available in a state or through your insurance in the U.S., and in Canada, whether it's on formulary. So in the States, what happened and what is continuing to happen is that each of the many insurance companies are deciding if they'll agree to pay for Spinraza and under what conditions, and how they will pay for the other steps related to Spinraza. In addition, in the U.S., they have to go through the same process with Medicare, with Medicaid, with the VA, and at the end of the day, there's a whole network of different types of companies involved in whether when the prescription for the drug goes from the doctor writing it to the patient actually getting the drug. In the U.S., they have one other issue, and that is because most of the Spinraza is planned to be given in hospitals, the actual hospitals get to weigh in on what happens with Spinraza. The system in Canada is obviously Canadian, so it's slightly different, and there are two parallel systems that are very similar, but they're not identical. And it's the Quebec and the ROC system. So Quebec and the rest of Canada. In Quebec, the process is regulated by something called INES, which is a national institute for excellence or the evaluation of health and social services. And it's essentially a regulatory body that is part of our health ministry that reviews all new drugs and therapies that are approved in Canada to determine whether the drug will be available for the disease it was used for in the clinical trial and under what circumstances. Which by that I mean not only will they make it available in Quebec, but to whom. So what tests you will have to do or what features you will have to have of your disease in order to get it through the RAMQ system. And finally, the price is negotiated with the company and with the other provinces. Right now, we're in that INES process in Quebec. So in Quebec, what's happened is the file has already been received. The experts are looking at the file. INES has actually approached the neuromuscular specialists around Quebec for their opinion on what the label, how it should be handled. They have not finished the recommendation. We're expecting them to hand their recommendation to the government or the health ministry in December of this year, so next month. So aside from the input from the company in terms of the submission and the physicians and the experts on INES, there is a role for patient advocates. It is an informal role, but it's certainly something that's important. And so because the process is still ongoing, if certainly you can contact INES, I'm assuming, because I've never gone on their website, that there is a way that you can do this to give your opinion or to make sure they understand how important a drug is to the patient population. Once this whole process is done, they will make a recommendation. It will be a written recommendation, and it will apply in the case of spinal muscular atrophy. It may say that all patients with spinal muscular atrophy of all types will be allowed to access Spinraza. It may say patients have to have 1, 2, or 3 features. It may determine what kinds of tests you have to do in order to get Spinraza and how frequently we will have to repeat the test for you to stay on the drug. So it's a real process. It's not just the physician decides you should get Spinraza and then you go to the pharmacy and pick it up. There's a whole process. The other piece that's going to come in all of the provinces is how we give it. Because the drug is a drug that we deliver through a lumbar puncture and we deliver it repeatedly, it's a drug that will require more than just a doctor prescription, but an entire system that to be set up to allow us to deliver the drug safely and repeatedly to patients. So once that process is done, then there is a participation. There's a negotiation process that's led by a Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, and that negotiation process is one where they sit with the company that makes Spinraza. In this case, it's Biogen. Other rare diseases, it's other companies, and negotiate the terms of how it's going to be listed on the formulary and what the reimbursement plan will be. So it is possible for the entire country to have the same process and the same rules and the same terms that the drug will be used on. It is also possible for Quebec to have somewhat different rules. In general, Quebec actually has an easier process than some of the other provinces, which is very interesting given the other aspects of our society. But in this world, the world of medications that are developed for rare diseases, they're very thoughtful and they really do work with the community to do the best for as many people as possible. So at the end of all this, there will be a system in place for the reimbursement and therefore access. So the reimbursement and access are closely tied, obviously. Access to Nusinersen, not only how we write the prescription, but how we get the prescription through the system so you can receive the drug. Another way of looking at it is, and we finished only the first step, and the step before this is Health Canada approval. So the submission has gone to INES. We're now waiting for the recommendation from INES to the Health Ministry. Health Ministry takes a look at it. Monsieur Barrette will make a decision, and then it will go through the alliance to negotiate the terms and the cost, and then the drug will be on formulary, and then we'll have to figure out how to get it to the people who are allowed to have it. The process, the timeline is on the right, and we're certainly hoping that we will be done the entire process by next summer, by the summer of 2018. It may be earlier. We will certainly know a tremendous amount more in December once we know what INES has decided. So even though it will take several more months, the information that we will have in December, we're expecting in December for INES, will be extremely helpful, because then we really can go ahead and figure out how to set up the system to deliver the drug. There is a program called SMA 360 that has been developed, and this program is to really help, once we know what the process will be, how to get the drug for yourself or for one of your family members. The most important thing, take-home message on SMA 360 is it starts with a prescription from a physician. And the real key moment is going to be that INES decision, because that prescription will have to be accompanied by whatever INES feels, whatever information INES feels is important in order for the Quebec government to cover the drug. And the same process happens in the rest of Canada under an organization called the Common Drug Review, CDR. It's the equivalent of INES, and they do the same process. The Common Drug Review is recommendations is then taken by all the other provinces, and they each decide how they're going to integrate it into their healthcare system. So Ontario will have their way of doing it based on the recommendation of CDR. BC may have a slightly different way. Each of the provinces do have ultimate control, but they really take these recommendations very seriously because they invest into this group. So this program is established. It currently is working with any patients with prescriptions who want to try to get the drug through their private insurance companies, and there may be some insurance companies that will already allow you to access the drug, but it really does start with the physician. So the physician has to write the prescription, and it's based really on what the recommendations are going to be. The other pieces of SMA 360, that really needs to be a conversation once you have the prescription with the group that's running this program. So that's Spinraza. So the idea, and it's important to understand the overall picture. Spinraza is an example. There is a drug development program that a company will have. Cytokinetics is currently working on another drug for SMA that's in the phase 2. You go through your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, you get positive results, you go for approval. In the US and Europe, there's something called an Orphan drug program, which is fantastic, basically, because what it does is for diseases like SMA, Duchenne's, ALS, it gives the small and large companies the opportunity to use faster drug development programs to enable them to bring a drug to a patient much quicker. They estimate it cuts from 5 to 7 years off the amount of time it takes if you're not considered under the orphan drug program. And they estimated that it saves many, many, many millions of dollars. So if a company, and I'll talk about a company like this in a minute, Avexis, only has one molecule, and they're a small company, they need all this assistance. It exists in the US, it exists in Europe, it exists but is not official in Canada. It's one of the big things that we would like to see change. We would like Canada to have an official orphan drug program so that all companies can get the benefits of it in Canada as well, because we believe that will increase interest in bringing drugs to Canada at the same time they're brought to the US and Europe. Obviously, my aim is to be first and get drugs here as soon as they start in patients. Once that whole drug development process is done, the approval is the second part. And I don't have a slide about this, but it's important to understand what happened with Spinraza in the US is a great example of something called an expedited review. They had phenomenal results that allowed them to stop a trial early. They then were able to submit to the FDA a full package based on their orphan drug development status, and they got another regulatory pathway that is very, very helpful in the US and Europe called expedited review. So the normal length of time to review, to approve a drug in the US can be a year, 365 days, and the expedited review can cut that in half. Now, I don't remember what it was for Spinraza, but it was super fast. And that means that from the time they saw that the babies were living and not dying and stopped the trial early, they were able to get the drug approved in the US as quickly as possible. Same system exists in Europe. Canada, again, does not have an official expedited review, and they have an expedited review process that they can tell you about if you call them, and we're hoping to make that a more official setup as well, because we also think that expedited review, a formal expedited review process in Canada will really help us. But the process for an expedited review in Canada now, rather than 365 days, is 210 days. So it's still a long period of time. It's not a week or a month, but it's dramatically quicker than a normal review process. So you get the approval, and then you launch into the process that I've just described with INES. Finally, you get it on RAMQ, and then RAMQ, for those from other provinces, is our Quebec program. And then it's really between you and your physician as to how we do, if you're a good candidate, how we give it, and how we give it the multiple doses. So That's Spinraza. That's the example of what we all consider the most exciting thing to happen in drug development in neurology in a very, very long time, maybe ever. The last time I saw this much excitement was when I was taking care of AIDS patients and we developed the triple therapy. It's that big a deal. But is it the only thing? Well, the really good news is, as Amy said, there are multiple programs. It's not just one. So, for various reasons, not everyone, that we don't totally understand, not every person given Spinraza had the same level of improvement. Some people did better than others. We also know that depending on how many symptoms you have, before you start the Spinraza, the amount of improvement may be vary. Some people got better, achieved more motor milestones. And we also know from the newest Spinraza program, the pre-symptomatic, is that identifying people really early, babies really early, essentially newborns, may give them an even better response. There's a discussion in various countries about newborn screening, not a topic I'm an expert in, but all this to say, Spinraza is the first, but it's not the only. So it's great to have a home run out of the, I have to say Houston did it a lot this year. Great to have a home run in the first inning, but there are others coming, and one of the next ones may be a grand slam. So the other drugs that we're bringing in need to be appreciated. Because maybe you'll do really well with Spinraza, maybe you'll do pretty well with Spinraza, but you want to do better. So what else is coming along? So fortunately, I had help with my slides because I'm terrible at making slides. This gives you a cartoon of where we are, what we're thinking, what people are doing in their labs to make lives of people born with SMA better. One of the blue bubble in the left-hand corner is where Spinraza sits because it increases the production of the normal SMN protein from the SMN2 gene. But there is a second program on the left side that has caused an equal level of excitement where we're using gene therapy in the form of a virus that acts like somebody called it a Trojan horse. I consider it very much Star Trek-y to me. The virus is then gutted and loaded up with the SMN1 gene and is delivered intravenously and gets incorporated into the where the SM1 gene normally sits, and from there, normal SMN protein gets generated. So that program is in phase 1, and the first 12 or 15 babies have been treated at Ohio State, and they've had phenomenal results. Dr. Brian Casper is working on that. These are examples of ways to directly increase SMN protein and to have the function of the motor neurons get closer to normal or near normal or even normal through proper increased production of the SMN protein. On the right-hand side are some other strategies that may be just as important for many people living with SMA. The one on the top right bubble, talks about increased muscle strength and endurance. So, one of the drugs I'm going to talk about in a minute, CK107, is a drug that does exactly that by binding to the fast skeletal muscle troponin activator complex and increase the amount of force you can generate in a muscle with a decreased number of motor neurons. So the idea of this drug is even if you've lost some motor neurons, so your nerves aren't as well connected, so your muscle is weak, if you take this drug for the same number of nerves, you can generate more force, so your muscle becomes stronger. And in addition to that, any fatigue you feel in your muscle as a result of not having as many motor neurons is diminished. The drug also decreases muscle fatigue. Very important, also happening in ALS, in a related compound called tirasemtiv, and we'll know next month whether tirasemtiv is actually proven to be effective in ALS. The bottom right bubble is a fourth approach currently being studied by Novartis, in which they're trying to maintain normal mitochondrial function in order to prevent the motor neuron death. So it doesn't create more SMN protein, but it does allow the motor neurons to live longer and therefore protect your strength by continuing to have more motor neurons that are functioning. So even by what I'm saying, you can see that if you have a partial response to one drug, you may be able to combine it with a second drug that works completely differently in order to improve your strength even further and be able to do more and more of what you want to do. Another way of looking at this is in this graph, and I actually start at the bottom and go up. So the two real categories are increasing the SMN protein or SMN protein independent. So on the left, we're talking about, the far left is the gene therapy, which is Avexis, and it's AVXS101, and this is the gene therapy with the virus and the gene in the center and just traveling right up the bloodstream and landing right where you need it in the motor neurons to improve the production of the SMN protein. The second panel, again SMN protein related, is the Spinraza antisense oligonucleotide, which just enables the read-through of the SMN2 mRNA by taking out the blocks to the reading of the exon 7, which is a critical scientific piece, and allows the production of normal SMN protein. The SMN independent are the two panels referred to the Novartis strategy of improving the basically preventing the death of motor neurons, and the cytokinetic strategy of improving the function of muscle with limited motor neurons available. When you look at the top panel on this graph, you'll see just how important SMA has become. So 30 years of families of SMA and Cure SMA has taken a disease from the discovery of the gene, of which a proud Canadian was part of it, Alex McKenzie in Ottawa, to us having the first approved drug. So that's really an impressive accomplishment. And I think if there's no other message for the rest of us when we study the entire case of SMA and the road to drug approval, it's that it took absolutely everybody. It's taken the families, it's taken the advocacy groups, it's taken the physicians, and it's taken a whole lot of companies that now are big, but 30 years ago didn't exist or were very small. So if you look at those top panels, for those of you who wonder why I care so much about orphan drug programs and breaks for small biotech, the first, the second, every single panel, third and fourth panels, all include small companies that started out as very small biotechs. So those nerdy scientists in one room in some corner of a university. It started with very small companies that needed breaks along the way, and some of the ways those breaks come are the orphan drug programs. So right now we're talking about Spinraza and its approval process and how people with SMA in Canada will be able to get it. But you're going to have conversations, I hope, within a few years about every other drug in this panel. The other line I want you to look at is the delivery method, because the delivery method matters as well. The gene therapy is supposed to be a one-shot and IV delivery method. It is obviously very early. It's in type 1 and it's phase 1. The Spinraza is approved in Health Canada. It's intrathecal. It will require a system to be set up where we can give the loading doses and then retreat every 4 months, similar to if someone had chemotherapies for cancer. The other 4 programs are oral. They're still in development. None of them are ready for approval yet, but they will all be they're all small molecules and therefore will be taken as pills ultimately. And the last 3 on the list are all focusing on type 1, 2, and 3 in their development programs. And Spinraza, as you all know, got a broad approval. So it will be tried in many people, and we will learn over time who responds the fastest, when the best timing is. That'll all be part of what we do now. Here's one of my cartoons. This sort of gives you the idea of how these nerdy scientists think, because the first time I was involved in a gene therapy program was actually around 1992, when we started trying to do gene therapies here in brain tumors and in some of the muscular dystrophies. What happens is you take a virus, and it took a lot of years to decide which virus. In this case, it's in the case of the Avexis, which is the Ohio State program. They chose the AAV9 after looking at a number of different viruses. And what the virus does, it gives the ability to deliver the gene right to our chromosomes, right to the spot where the SMN1 gene is missing in babies with SMA. The shell of the virus protects the gene from being broken down, but there's another whole layer of science that goes into what does the gene need in addition to the gene itself. And so in the Avexis program, which is the SMA program, it not only needs the gene itself, it needs a promoter gene to make sure it goes to the right place, and it needs protectors on both ends to make sure that the gene itself isn't damaged. It happens that the SMN gene is small enough to use this technology. One of the frustrations with Duchenne muscular dystrophy is that the dystrophin gene is so big. They're working very hard to try to cut it down to a size that can fit inside a virus and be delivered effectively. So it's not just one virus. It's not just one virus going upstream from the intravenous up to the motor neuron. 4 trillion viral vectors are injected when you do the intravenous administration. So there's a lot running around trying to get to the right spots. Obviously, you give that many in order to ensure that enough get to where they're supposed to go. You don't get the flu with this. They've incapacitated the virus in this process, so it's a recombinant shell of a virus that works with the gene. So super exciting. Victoria put in this cartoon, and I keep on trying to use it properly. So essentially, the virus chugs along like you would in Star Wars, up into the unknown, hits where the chromosome is missing the SMN1 gene. It gets delivered. The viral vector allows the gene to fill the gap, essentially, replace the area that's missing, and ultimately the SMN protein is made from the RNA that's produced by the reconstituted gene. So that's the future. Here's the now. The now is something called an ASO, which is an antisense oligonucleotide. The company that started making these began production in 1995. It's been around a long time, and it focused initially on completely different diseases. It focused on liver and GI tract diseases. It's always worked with antisense oligos. ISIS was its name until the other ISIS appeared, and then eventually it had to change its name to Ionis for obvious reasons. But the key to what's happened here is it was actually someone in San Diego, which is where the company is based, that came up with the idea of trying it in SMA and trying it in using a lumbar puncture, and is one of the great stories of this drug development process. So an antisense oligonucleotide is a single strand. It's a commercial. It is not humanized tissue. It's actually a synthetic single strand of nucleic acids that actually go in and bind to a specific sequence on the RNA and basically regulate the way the SMN gene is expressed to allow SMN protein to be produced. So it goes in, it again is delivered intrathecally. It's remarkably safe, given what we're doing, and it's remarkably good at finding where it should go. And it sets up the ability, what it does in SMA is it interferes with the part of the SMN2 gene that blocks the reading of the exon 7. So the SMN2 gene should, in theory, be able to produce SMN protein just like the SMN1 gene, but it has two areas which prevent the production of the SMN protein, and this ASO goes in and blocks the areas that are preventing the read-through of exon 7, which allows for the SMN2 gene to be read normally. So it doesn't actually produce the protein. It blocks a part of the SMN2 gene that prevents the production of the protein to allow the protein to be produced. So in some ways, it's a double negative. It blocks something that prevents production, so it allows the protein to be produced. Really quite ingenious. The cartoons and I, however, are not good together. So it essentially does this, and it makes the protein. Now, there we go. We go really fast. So it blocks the area in the SMN2 gene that prevents the production of the protein, allowing the protein. Another important piece of the ASO is that it's delivered by a lumbar puncture. That actually allows a few things. It prevents the protein from being broken down in the system, because anything you give by mouth or by intravenous has the potential to be cleared by the liver, and so never gets to where you want it to go. And we do know that when it's delivered through the LP needle, that it actually is distributed up and down throughout the entire central nervous system, because although we think of our brain and spinal cord and the fluid around it as static, it's actually the fluid is continuously being made and being cleared. So there's continuous movement of the cerebrospinal fluid, which means that you get a natural delivery system. Even though you inject it in the low back, it circulates throughout. And it actually penetrates, it goes into the brain itself, into the spinal cord itself, and it allows the ASO to reach the motor neurons and allows this production of the SMN protein. There is some turnover. So what happens is that you actually need a loading dose and maintenance doses. We have a schedule right now that was based on the clinical trials. It may be that in 5 years we'll figure out that there is another schedule that's equally beneficial, but right now there are loading doses and maintenance doses, and so that really will be important. Once we know the rules around the drug approval and listed in formulary, we will then really have to come up with a good solution for treating all the patients who have the disease. And the other piece of this, which I mentioned in the last program, is patients who have problems with their spine because they've had SMA since they were young or they've developed scoliosis, we're already thinking about how we're going to have to get around that in order to try Spinraza in patients who've had the disease for a while. So it's super exciting. There's a lot of things happening in parallel to enable us to treat as many people as possible who want the treatment by the time it arrives on formulary. Just so that you are aware of what the data is that INES is looking at, they're looking at things like this graph from the INDARE study, how the percentage of motor milestone responders, and this is in clinical trials, this is an unbelievable result. But what they saw in the pre-symptomatic Nusinersen treated infants, that they had 41% had very significant motor milestone improvements and continue to improve. So they're continuing to fall, the babies are continuing to get their Spinraza and they're continuing to do well. What is also important is that not everyone improves. And so we're going to have to figure out why there are certain babies that didn't improve and if there's something different we need to do for those babies. Another way of looking at all those statistics is these lines. So the Nurture study, which was the pre-symptomatic infantile onset babies, you see how well their motor milestones did. And in fact, a number of these babies look entirely normal despite having SMA. You'll see that later the onset, which are the lower bars, the gray one on the bottom is no therapies. But as you look at the red bar, those are treated but symptomatic babies. So what we saw in the trials was the degree, the timing was really important. In the type 1s, the earlier the treatment in terms of when they were symptomatic seemed to be really important, but it does not seem to be the only factor. So we're still trying to figure out other things that may be going on. I'm going to discuss one more program, in part because it's the one program that is currently very active. We're still recruiting, and it is actually open to patients with type 3 SMA. And this is the Cytokinetics Muscle Activator Program. This cartoon sort of emphasizes what this company is all about. Cytokinetics is a San Francisco-based company that has been working for 15 or 20 years on drugs that will improve the contraction of muscle. So they have a program for heart muscle, cardiac muscle, that are focused on something called congestive heart failure. And they have a second program for skeletal muscle, or muscles in the limbs. And the current active programs for skeletal muscle are in ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and in SMA, or spinal muscular atrophy. The drug that's being used in the ALS program, the one that is going to read out in December, is called tirasemtiv, which is the name on the slide. The one that is currently in clinical trial here, which is in phase 2, is CK107. But they both work in the same way, in that what they do is they improve the fast skeletal troponin activation by decreasing the speed of release of calcium at the troponin activation complex. So your brain signals to a motor neuron that you want the muscle to contract. The drug goes into where the fast skeletal muscle troponin complex is, and it interferes with the release of the calcium after you tell the muscle to contract. And by doing that, it allows the muscle to actually generate more force for the amount of signal it's getting from its motor neuron, and it allows the muscle to contract for longer. So it treats weakness and it treats fatigue of muscle. Why is that important? You know, I have SMA, it's a motor neuron disease. I have ALS, it's a motor neuron disease. Why is that important? Because the symptoms of your motor neuron disease are weakness of various kinds, either weakness of your diaphragm so that you're having trouble breathing, or weakness of your limb muscles, your arms, your legs, your hands, your feet. And so if a drug can allow your muscle to be more efficient and contract stronger from less signal, then you can actually have an improvement of your breathing. Your life actually can change because of the functional benefit. The things that you can continue to do that you would otherwise lose. It's a concept of functional preservation. And for someone who would like to stay out of a wheelchair or off a ventilator, this can actually have a real-time benefit. So that's why this is being tried in SMA. It amplifies the signal from the nerve. It should increase more purposeful movement, and as I said, improve muscle strength and decrease muscle fatigue. So what works for me? So that should be everyone's question. So what should I try? Well, first of all, you should try what you're eligible to try, and we'll all work with you. Your physician is part of your team. Your advocacy group is part of your team. The companies are trying to invent the drugs their drugs approved are part of the team. Everyone's part of the team. So then the step is what you're allowed to try is what you should try. And it may be that ultimately we'll land right in the middle where we have drugs that improve the disease by increasing the amount of protein, SMN protein from the SMN2 or the SMN1 gene, working in combination with drugs that work distant from the gene but improve the function of the muscles that ultimately allow you to live your life normally. So it's probably going to be a combination, and really Spinraza is the beginning of a journey. Although it's the end of a journey for the drug development program, it's the beginning of the journey for all of us. My Dr. Scooey sent me this yesterday to show me that SMN is absolutely everywhere, and so we're a little bit like a cat in the hat. We're trying to capture it all to make us all function better. One of the last things I want to mention before I actually say thank you is for those of you who are not based in Montreal, there are physicians who are experts in neuromuscular disease and SMA around the province who are going to be your go-to people. If you haven't seen a neurologist lately, it might be time to go. We know that lots of type 2s and type 3s don't necessarily continue to be followed in neuromuscular clinics. But Dr. Nadeau in Sherbrooke, Dr. Nicolas Christian, and Dr. Annie Dion in Quebec City, Dr. Nguyen and Dr. Oskouyi in Montreal, along with Dr. O'Farrell and myself, and at the SHUM, Dr. Botez and Dr. Matt, all have a very strong interest in helping you get to the treatments that are going to help your disease. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, and I think we're doing questions.
So next thing on our agenda is the panel with the live Q&A. So we'll be taking questions from you guys here as well as those that have been submitted online. And our participants will be all the speakers. So Amy Loignon from Cure SMA, myself, and Dr. Genge. And to facilitate our program, we will have Marie-Hélène Boldic from Muscular Dystrophy Canada, who will be posing the questions.
So the question is, how do I envision the combination therapy unfolding? So I'm going to go to another neurological disease, MS. And what happens, and this is across the board, it's not another, I could also choose a cancer. I could choose a small cell lung cancer. What happens first is all the studies look at all of the new therapies separately. That always happens first because we have to make sure that what we're seeing is not chance. With Spinraza, we were able to prove that it wasn't chanced quite clearly in the babies. And there are going to be programs, there are programs already that they've done in the 2 to 15-year-olds, and there are planned programs for the adults so that we can build the case for the use of who should get Spinraza. Right now, because Spinraza is not available to everybody in a sort of uniform way, the trials with the new drugs are not including Spinraza, and understandably so, because you can't, in a trial where you're trying to determine if a drug is working, you either have to have a very uniform exposure to anything else. So the CK107, the cytokinetics drug, is not with Spinraza. I would and there are at least the gene therapy program, the Roche program, and I think the Novartis program currently are alone. They don't include Spinraza. But I would expect that within a couple of years, the new trials are going to have Spinraza as part of them. And that's when we're going to see more combination therapies, except any drug that's supposed to work in the same way as Spinraza. You're not going to ever put two drugs that are supposed to work exactly the same way in the same patient. But you may very well put a drug that works at the muscle with a drug that increases the SMN protein. Because so far what we're seeing with the SMN protein therapies, Spinraza, is that we can improve function, but based on the patients in the trials, they don't necessarily go to normal, so there's a gap. And so there's room for more improvement. So I expect it to be a rollout. I think we're still in the phase where Spinraza is not included in the current clinical trials. That will change, and ultimately I think we're going to be using disease-modifying and functional preservation drugs in the same people, because disease-modifying gets you one level, and the therapies that are independent of the SMN protein may get you the rest of the way. So the question was, when we start doing drugs that trials with Spinraza, how exactly will we have to break out the different groups so that we're sure of the results? And, the other piece of it is we want to make sure we're not causing side effects by combining drugs. So most likely that people will do either one study with two separate streams or two separate studies with and without Spinraza. They'll have to do one or the other. But a lot will depend on what we learn about Spinraza in the next 5 years. Well, as we learn which patients benefit the most, we'll then have to incorporate that knowledge into the trials with the new drugs. And I think the more challenging thing is actually going to be with the drugs that also claim to increase the SMN protein. It's going to be easier to design the trials with the drugs that have another target. That would be my guess. So somebody asked the last session if they could have the slides, and we can make the slides available. But I think the thing that I'd really like to reinforce is that the physicians are really your physician's trying to work with you, and really, really trying to make sure that whoever gets the drug, who gets it as quickly as they can. So if you have a physician that you're working, that is your physician that isn't totally aware of the drug, ask to see someone like Dr. Nadeau in Sherbrooke or Dr. Nguyen at Saint-Justin, who can really fill you in on the process, because you're going to really need to work together. The other thing I want to do is have a shout out to a young man in the audience who I won't embarrass completely, although he knows who he is. Because when he first came into clinic and we made the diagnosis, I promised him that we would get drugs to him. And it's absolute delight to be bringing drugs to Quebec and to Canada for this disease. And I'm hoping to be doing it very soon for my patients with ALS. So I really appreciate all your listening. I think Victoria has some more words, but remember that you need to be informed, and if you're out there in the stratosphere watching it on webinar, and you haven't been to clinic in a long time, be stubborn, book your appointments, even if it takes hours to see your neurologist, because they're really, really busy, because there's information you need to get yourself set up so that you can get Spinraza or the next drug. There will be things we have to do for you to get that prescription filled. So get yourself in and get things done so that you're ready. And I apologize to absolutely every adult that has to do a Hammersmith or a chop and tend, because you may have to do it to get Spinraza. We don't know yet, but we are working very hard to make the assessments a little bit more adult friendly.
So I quickly wanted to thank all of you for being here today and also watching online. Again, these slides, I can provide the slides, but the videos themselves will be available on Muscular Dystrophy Canada's website. I wanted to give a quick thank you to Marie-Hélène Boldic and Stacy Lintern from the MDC for their help organizing this and also the filming. Amy Lundqvist and Annie Mongren from Biogen, who gave us the information about Spinraza. And also my team, Lindsay, Selma, Jimmy, and Sophie, who helped organize today. Last minute shout out to Cytokinetics as well, who provided the reception outside. So one last thing, we want your feedback. So any comments on the program, how it can improve, and things that we could do better or explain better, please send an email to our CRU Symposium address. And without further ado, thank you very much.